If we can move on to Serie A, which I think is, in terms of the top of the league, of the European leagues, is the one to watch because, one week it's Napoli, the next week it's Inter, but who will it be at the top next week is the question. These two teams meet each other at the weekend. It feels like Napoli have not shot themselves in the foot, but they're not being top of the league is of their own making to a certain extent, would you not say?
Yeah, I think if you're going to say shot themselves in the foot, now's probably the right time to say it. After it's not just that they lost at Como, a game that I feel, the result defines how we look at it. I thought they were okay, good in the first half. They could have easily ground it out. But I think if you look at the way that it fell, the fact that Rahmani scores this ridiculous own goal right at the beginning, he's not looking, he passes it back, and Merit's not really paying attention, and it goes in. But they recover from that. Raspadori equalises, they get themselves back into the game, and then they manage to find a way to lose it, where normally you would back this Napoli and Antonio Conte Napoli to find a way of winning it in the second half. And the fact that they didn't, even though it's the first game they've lost since the start of December, since they lost to Lazio like a week into December, I think because it's almost confirmation bias, because we've been feeling all the way along that are Napoli really good enough to win this league? If they give us the slightest encouragement to believe, actually, maybe they can be a little bit vulnerable, all of a sudden, we're always expecting Inter to really come after them at some point. That point hasn't quite happened yet. And so there's this feeling of, well, are they going to do it this weekend? Especially following on from what Napoli did or didn't do at Como.
Big weekend?
Look, if Napoli honestly do win this league, I'd be really impressed. It would be an unbelievable effort because not many teams sell their best player in January, then go on to win the league, who are fighting for a title. It's probably unheard of. I can't really think of another instance off the top of my head. I'm sure somebody who's listening can, but I can't think of it. And in these type of games where I know that in this particular game, it wasn't the case of the attack letting them down, it was a defensive failings. But you'd think if you have that player who's of that quality of Kvaratskhelia level, he can win you games. He can turn games that are particularly tight. And I just don't see how they can push on and win the league without him and without that quality around, without being properly replaced.
That's the interesting thing. You're right. It's about the replacement because you look at it and you think, well, Kvaratskhelia wasn't their best player this season up until the point that he left. So it's easy to convince yourself that, they'll probably be all right without him. But actually, if you look at the attacking numbers, they've fallen off a cliff since Kvaratskhelia gone. And it's not just what he does on the ball, it's the space that he creates off the ball as well.
Yeah, we saw that in the Euros,
yes,
didn't we?
And it's the defensive effort that he makes. There's so much that go into making him an important player that even when I think it's easy to look at Kvaratskhelia and think when he's not beating six and smashing it in the corner, he's not effective. He's often effective. He always finds a way to influence the game, even when he's not at his absolute best.
He can be your best defender because he can take pressure off. He can get you 30, 40 yards up the pitch and then the pressure's off your defence.
He can. And one of the biggest problems, of course, is, they tried a couple of things to like get a replacement for him. Of course, they were after Garnacho for a long time and couldn't come to an agreement with Manchester United. They tried to get Alain Saint-Maximin even a little bit too late in the window. So there was definitely a feeling from Conte that we need something. Now, knowing how Napoli and De Laurentiis operate, I can understand why they didn't want to go big and spend probably over market value on Garnacho, for example, in January. I think that's quite a reasonable approach. But part of it's been luck, really, in that David Neres, who'd started to play really well, has now got injured. So they're not able to use him. And he would have taken an enormous amount of pressure off. And I think he would have been a key player in this part of the season. He had a difficult bedding in period and then he'd started to play really well. There's the fact that Lukaku at the moment is not playing well at all. And I think that's a massive, massive issue for them. Now, if you're talking about what David was saying about your attack being the best part of your defence, this is the problem for Napoli at the moment. We know Antonio Conte teams can grind stuff out. And like we said, I think they played well enough in that game at Como that 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, especially in the first part of the season, they would have won that. But with no Neres, without Lukaku playing well, and there was a lot of controversy about him getting dragged off in the second half, but if you don't want to get dragged off, play better, really. And at the moment, it's provided an extra opportunity for Giacomo Raspadori, who's come back into the team and scored a couple of goals. But they can't be leaning on him for the rest of the season. They need more from Lukaku. They need a fit Neres. Otherwise, I think it's going to be difficult for them.
Is it not? I mean, we're talking about De Laurentiis and his approach, and he's had the same approach for a number of years now. Is it not a bit ambitionless? You can potentially win the Serie A title. You can wrestle it back. Why don't you, in January, go and action it and improve the squad and just make damn sure you're going to be there when it comes to the last 5 or 6 games of the season?
I think De Laurentiis, the way he runs Napoli will never change.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is, I think it's easy to look at it from the outside as a lack of ambition, especially when he's such a theatrical man. He gives it the big one all the time. And, you think of going back to when he presented Gökhan Inler and he revealed himself from under the lion's head and all that sort of stuff. But he's actually quite a sensible guy. And I think it's because of where he picked Napoli up. Napoli were in financial chaos when he took over. So I think it would be quite anachronistic if he started going out there and all of a sudden started spending 50 million on a couple of players. I don't think Napoli are ever going to do that. He's been quite prudent in wages as well. Of course, that created a lot of problems after they won the league with both Osimhen and particularly Kvaratskhelia. They had to sell him in the end because they didn't ink him to a new contract earlier enough which would have protected them from losing him. I mean, that might still work out to be a great deal for everyone involved. It's just at this moment in time, it looks a little bit difficult. All I would say is the last time that Napoli played Inter in the league, you go back to December and they've just come off the back, Napoli, of getting absolutely thrashed at home by Atalanta. Atalanta were way better than them when they won at Stadio Diego Armando Maradona in November. Lookman had an unbelievable game that day. Gasperini really schooled Conte, I thought, that day and managed the game brilliantly. And Conte came out afterwards and said, well, yeah, they're just a bit ahead of us. Maybe we're not really cut out for challenging for this league. They go to Inter the next week and they get a draw. And I think that's quite important. Napoli can't win the league this weekend, but they could take a massive step to losing it this weekend if they lose this game. Yeah. And so they need a performance that, it doesn't need to be their best performance of the season. It needs to be a performance that shows the requisite character and attention to detail that gets them at least the draw, I think.
There's only one point in it. Although Atalanta, that you mentioned a moment or two, they're only 3 points off the pace. I suppose we need to talk about them because they're embroiled in all sorts of issues off the field as well as, I imagine, on the field to a certain extent.
And because of that, it's easy to forget where they are points-wise, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. And they're third. Yeah. They're challenging for the title. They're in it. They might be the dark horses, but they're certainly in it. Gasperini, though, perhaps hasn't helped himself as a coach, or is he just a victim of circumstances?
I don't know. If he's a victim of circumstances, it's circumstances of his own making.
Well, this is the point I'm trying to say. Are we here now, Gasperini, possibly looking at losing one of the best players in Atalanta this season in terms of Ademola Lookman, but also going forward, I wonder whether he is the coach that is the right coach for Atalanta.
Well, I think that's a really good question. He's been the right coach for Atalanta for so long. It's difficult to imagine them without him. They have changed dimension with him as a coach. It's a little bit like, in that sense, it's a little bit like Atletico and Simeone. It's very hard to imagine the two of them apart. And Atalanta, like Atletico, were a completely different club before their current coach took over. Now they've got a unique opportunity because, as you say, they're not just contenders. Let's look at the detail. They're 3 points off the top. They are playing Venezia this weekend in Bergamo, before this Napoli-Inter game. So, unless something really wild happens, I mean, Venezia are not a good team. They're going to go into this game, Napoli and Inter, with Atalanta ahead of Napoli and Atalanta level on points with Inter at the top. That is amazing, especially when you go back a month and look at the little wobble they had. And forget the Champions League stuff and all the row with Lookman for a minute. They have managed to get themselves into a position, and especially as Retegui has started scoring at an incredible rate again. He was involved in this 5-0 win at Empoli last weekend. They have got a really unique opportunity, and actually maybe getting knocked out of the Champions League kind of helps them, because they've got a little bit of an extra breather, and that it puts them maybe in a similar place to Napoli in terms of rest and recovery. Whereas Inter are all in for this Champions League. They're going for it, aren't they? Feyenoord in the last 16.
Yeah, there's an argument there it's their top priority.
Yeah,
which we've discussed before.
It's a big thing for them. Although, we have to say, Inter are all in for the league and they're all in for this game. They rested 8 players in the Coppa Italia this week, which is why Marko Arnautovic was able to score that brilliant goal in the quarter-final against Lazio. But I think we can focus so much on this Lookman thing. And we've been here before, as we said last week on Ask OTC with Gasperini. He's fell out with a player, a big player, and hasn't been able to fix it. But what we've seen from Lookman here is, despite the fact that Gasperini's not really doing anything to fix the situation, and Lookman's definitely not backing down, Lookman is not going to let it affect his performance.
Definitely not.
So he scored 2 goals. He was absolutely brilliant. 2 brilliant goals as well. Was absolutely fantastic in this game at Empoli. Empoli followed this up, by the way, in reaching the Coppa Italia semi-finals for the first time ever in over 100 years of history by winning on pens at Juventus this week. So, something that's really important for them. But you look at this now and you think, even if Gasperini and Lookman don't fix what the issue is, does it matter?
I think
really for this run-in? Maybe it doesn't.
It's one of those situations where you can just put it aside. They can sit down with each other and say, look, we don't like each other, but we can win a Liga, yeah? And then we can go our separate ways. And then Gasperini will go off from Atalanta wherever he wants to go. He's been linked with going. And then obviously we all know Lookman is going to go as well. And also it's in Lookman's best interest to continue to keep the form that he has. And he can command a better move in the summer. There'll be a lot of interested teams as well. And look, people will be watching and saying, if his head drops after this, then that's a bit of a red flag. But if he keeps his form up, then he can have his pick of moves, basically.
It's a brilliant response, whichever way you look at it.
Of course it is, yeah, absolutely. And they can absolutely win this league. And that's, I think the key point is what Andy said, is the fact that they could have this extra breather now, and whereas Inter and also this game between Inter and Napoli is going to be unbelievably emotional draining, no matter what the outcome is, especially if one of the teams wins and it isn't a draw. I think it could have a major emotional impact on that particular team who loses.
Of course, if it's a draw, then Atalanta come into the mix.
Yeah.
And it becomes an even more exciting top of the league.
Well, that's what they're hoping, isn't it? That this is their weekend to make the most of it. They've got an absolute gimme of a game, Atalanta, and they're hoping that they know that those teams are going to take points off each other. Hopefully, like 2 points off each other. That's what they're really hoping. But I think the sort of peak that it's building to, because this week we know that Gasperini's not staying beyond the end of his contract in 2026. We said how hard it is to imagine him apart from Atalanta, but that is what is happening now. He might even leave in the summer. Claudio Ranieri, who's having a big part in choosing his own successor at Roma, has put feelers out to Gasperini. I mean, immediately I'm wondering which young superstar player he's going to fall out with at Roma. but I think it's really interesting that once you get past this season, whether Atalanta win the league or not, what more can Gasperini do there? Like, he has done everything. He has done beyond what it is possible to do. Mm-hmm. I think he must be absolutely itching, whether he says it or not, for another chance. And I know he's at quite an advanced stage in his career, well into his 60s, obviously. But another chance at a big club. Now, he had those 4 games at Inter all those years ago, and that must be an itch that he is desperate to scratch. If you go to Roma, you've got a ground that's full more often than not nowadays, a club that's changed in slightly different ways over the last couple of years. You've got really ambitious owners. You've got a good squad. You've got a new stadium on the horizon in the medium future, and a club that always looks to get it done in Europe, because whatever Roma's issues over the last couple of years, their successes in Europe have really allowed Serie A to get so many European places, because it's pushed the coefficient up and up and up. So it's a really interesting idea at Rome. Like, honestly, David, I've no idea whether it would work or not, but I would be really interested to see if it did work.
Yeah, above all, it's really intriguing. I can't say it either way as well. I've got big doubts about Roma as a club in their current guise. But yeah, you can't say it either way. But and then part of me's like, oh, I do want to see Gasperini get one more big job and try it. And then another part of me is sentimental side is kind of like, he just suits Atalanta. It's just nice him being there and working with that. But Andy makes the best point in that, where else can he go? What else can he do with them? He's in a position where, which I don't think he has before, in the fact that he's working with one of the best players in the world in his position, in Lookman. Is he going to get that again? Probably not. So he's got to weigh all this up.